volcano blows itself apart, blasting its way into history with unimaginable force. This eruption was one of the most destructive of all time, affecting the entire planet years after the explosion. Mt Pinatubo in the Philippines, June 15, 1991. Deep in the dark heart of the Philippines lies a small and undistinguished peak. Once it was a volcano, one of the biggest the world has ever seen. But for 5 centuries, Mt Pinatubo has been dormant, ignored by the hundreds of thousands of Filipinos in the towns and cities that have grown up in its shadow. But for an ancient people living high on its slopes, the mountain is sacred. The Aitas celebrate and worship Mt Pinatubo. Like all her tribe, Flor de la Cruz believes that Apo Malari, the god of all things, lives inside the mountain.
Bilang isang katutubo,
it is our responsibility to look after the mountain, defend it, and care for it. It is holy because we believe it is Apo Malari's home.
But stirring deep within Pinatubo is not a god, but a molten monster. Cracks are opening in the bedrock of the mountain, and miles beneath the Earth's crust lies the cause, a colossal churning sea of magma, superheated molten rock. Titanic forces are at play, but far above, on the fragile surface, few have any idea they are living on top of a volcano. Then, on the morning of April 2nd, 1991, comes the first warning of an apocalypse. A series of small explosions rocked the remote summit of Pinatubo. But the Aitas are the only people to see the explosions and the plumes of steam. Pinatubo's warning has no witnesses except those who worship it.
The people were terrified when they saw the explosions on the mountain. No one knew what was happening. That night, there was a red light on top of the mountain. It looked like blood was coming out.
The next morning, the Aitas describe what they have seen to a local nun, Sister Emma Fontavilla. She sets off for the lowlands with Flor de la Cruz as an eyewitness, determined to report the explosions to the government authorities. They travel to Manila, 55 miles south, passing from one world to another. Finally, they come to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. Sister Emma convinces a skeptical staff to let her and Flor meet their director, world-renowned volcanologist, Dr. Ray Punangbayan.
isang pagsabog, explosion.
Ray may be an internationally respected scientist, but he's working in a third-world country. The few seismographs he has are tied up, monitoring another volcano to the south of Manila. Why should he heed the fears of a superstitious tribe who believe their god is angry? Pinatubo awaits his decision. If he ignores this warning, he won't get another chance. He takes a fateful step. He orders one of his seismic teams to the summit. From the air, they see the smoking vents described by Flor de la Cruz. And when they land, the first flickers of their seismograph tell them something is stirring within this long-dead volcano. Over the next 24 hours, they detect more than 200 separate earthquakes. Pinatubo is coming to life. The earthquakes could be caused by the geothermal movement of steam and superheated water. But Ray Punangbayan's instinct tells him there are other forces at work, far deeper, far more powerful. He knows that the Philippines lies on the Ring of Fire, a vast arc encircling the Pacific Ocean, home to most of the world's volcanoes. Deciding whether one of them, Mt Pinatubo, is coming to life will be a poker game of science versus nature, where the stakes are life and death. Not only for the 20,000 Aitas living on the mountain itself, but also for the hundreds of thousands of Filipinos in the towns and cities of the surrounding lowlands. And just 15 miles from the summit, the largest U.S. military base on foreign soil, Clark Air Base, home to 16,000 American servicemen and their families, and billions of dollars of military hardware. In all, nearly 1 million lives, Filipino and American, will depend on Ray's ability to outguess one of the great forces of nature.
A volcano is not an enemy nor an adversary. It's something that you try to befriend, in fact, and try to understand what it is, what it's going to do. Then you have to read the signals properly. And if you fail to do that, then you lose in the game.
Trying to predict a volcanic eruption is not for the faint-hearted. It is part science, part gut instinct. And there are few seismic detectives who can successfully track these killers from the deep earth. Ray knows that a volcanic eruption cannot be stopped, but it can be escaped. If Pinatubo is on the boil, it will be his job to say when it's going to blow. And he will get only one chance. If he calls an evacuation too early, those ordered out of the danger zone will come back. And if he calls it too late, hundreds of thousands may die. For days, his team tracks the earthquake swarming deep beneath the mountain, but their equipment is outdated. The Filipinos need help, and Ray knows where to find it. Chris Newhall of the United States Geological Survey in Washington is an old friend and a volcanologist. He's got the high-tech instruments that will help Ray penetrate Pinatubo's secret. On April 23rd, he and a crack team of U.S. scientists join Ray's task force of volcano detectives. They set up their operations center at Clark Air Base within sight of Pinatubo's summit. To them, as to all who live around it, the mountain looks just as it has since the time of Columbus.
Yeah, because this particular...
We were acutely conscious of the fact that there had been no eruption at Pinatubo for 500 years, and many, many people, perhaps even a majority, doubted that it was even a volcano.
Ray and his team know Pinatubo is a volcano, but what kind and how dangerous? While some volcanoes, like Mauna Loa and Kilauea in Hawaii, release free-flowing rivers of lava, the most catastrophic type of eruptions are explosive. Mountain loads of magma that detonate suddenly and usually without warning. Instead of lava, explosive volcanoes hurl out massive pyroclastic flows, superheated tidal waves of rock and ash.
It's a hot hurricane or hot blast of rock and ash and gas. And we know enough about pyroclastic flows to know that virtually nobody survives.
Ray and Chris study aerial photographs to plot the footprint of Pinatubo's last eruption. They are shocked by what they see in the maps and the ancient geological record. An explosive volcano as big as any in history.
I think the oh my God moment came very early. We could see straight away that the kind of explosive eruptions that had occurred in the past from Pinatubo were of the same order of magnitude as what had occurred at Krakatau in 1883.
Krakatoa, a remote Indonesian island, blew up in 1883 and remains the deadliest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The detonation was heard 3,000 miles away and created a tsunami 100 feet high that drowned 36,000 people. And in Pinatubo's eroded canyons, Ray and Chris find evidence of a Krakatoa-sized eruption. Pyroclastic flows that once incinerated and buried the land under Clark Air Base. Could it be capable of such a cataclysm again? The seismographs trace a veiled but deadly threat. 1 million lives hang in the balance. 1 million unwitting souls dependent on just a few. Ray and his team are intensely worried about Pinatubo's awesome past. And the seismologists continue to detect clusters of earthquakes deep beneath the surface. Ray has ordered an evacuation of the immediate area around the summit. Only the Itas are affected, but to them it is heartbreaking. To them, leaving their sacred land also means turning their backs on their God. From the high slopes, thousands of Itas begin to trek down the mountain to resettlement camps in the lowlands. But in a remote ravine on Pinatubo's southeast face, one tribe of Itas has decided to stay and put their fate in the hands of Apo Malare. Hiding from the Army and the Air Force, whose job it is to ensure Ray's evacuation order is carried out, they seek shelter in a cave.
Yung iba pwede pumunta sa kaliwa nila dito.
But the quakes diminish. Nothing is reading right. Deep beneath the earth, there is now only a sinister silence. Is Pinatubo just playing dead, or has it settled back into its centuries-old sleep? Has Ray called a false alarm? Volcanoes have claimed countless victims in surprise attacks. But there have also been thousands killed who were warned, but failed to listen. In 1985, the city of Armero in Colombia is buried by a volcanic flow. In the weeks and days before, scientists told those who lived here that Mount Nevado del Ruiz was going to erupt. But neither they nor their government listened. 23,000 people died.
Nevado del Ruiz is etched onto the mind of every volcanologist. It was a terrible tragedy, and it was completely avoidable had people understood what the hazard was that they were facing. They could have actually walked to safety.
Ray Punangbayan is determined not to let that happen in his country. But right now, he's hanging in the wind of skepticism and outright disbelief. The U.S. military command at Clark thinks Ray and his scientific team are overreacting. So do many in the Filipino government, which can ill afford a mass evacuation if Ray decides to call it. And as if to spite him and his team, Pinatubo barely stirs for days. And Chris is fighting his own battle with official skepticism. Washington is threatening to pull the plug on his team and their precious equipment unless he delivers some clear answers fast on whether Pinatubo is really going to blow. He and Ray have to find some clear evidence that there's magma arising beneath Pinatubo. To find that proof means a risky chopper flight low over Pinatubo's steaming vents. Magma contains highly pressurized sulfur dioxide. If Chris can find the gas, he's found the magma beneath the surface.
What I'll do is see that first little ridge line up there. I'll try and set it up so we can go right up about there and make a left pass along down to this ridge line here.
But the chopper is ill-suited to the task. Its rotors churn the air and confuse the detection instruments.
Let's drop down a minute. Okay, coming down, standard, using throttles.
Taking the chopper any lower is dangerous. An unexpected blast of steam could bring them down. But it's their only chance of detecting sulfur dioxide. To Chris, it's worth the risk.
Well, do you want us to keep flying around looking at it, or? Yeah, we got to make sure what it is. Let's
he finds sulfur dioxide, tons of it, escaping from the volcano's vents. There's no way of telling how close the magma is to the surface, but the sulfur dioxide is his first real clue that an eruption could happen. But what he cannot see or even guess at is the magnitude of the coming cataclysm. A giant white-hot fist is preparing to strike. But little on the surface gives any sign that a mega eruption is brewing. Just ahead, as Pinatubo wages its war on the Philippines, soldiers at the U.S. Air Force Base are forced to leave, while a local tribe hunkers down in a nearby cave. Surviving will be right back. For 2 weeks, the team at Clark monitors the sulfur dioxide levels over the summit. For 2 weeks, they hold steady. Then suddenly, they plummet. It can mean only one of two things. Either the magma has subsided and Pinatubo has called off its attack, or it is blocked and pressurizing. A gigantic powder keg that could blow catastrophically at any moment. Ray has to make the call. Is Pinatubo going up, or is it going quiet? It is an awesome choice to make. An eruption could happen in a day or a decade. Volcanoes do not keep the time of men.
We know the stakes are high. We don't know how long the fuse is. You have to work fast.
People in Los Angeles have really...
With the tragedy of Nevado del Ruiz in Colombia haunting him, Ray decides the moment has come to call his enemies bluff.
A more climatic eruption that will soon occur.
He finally orders a general evacuation of the provinces around Pinatubo. The call goes out to almost 1 million people. But is it already too late? Will everyone heed the call? On the outskirts of Angeles City, Beng Mendoza is about to go into labor.
None of us believed the volcano was going to erupt.
Neither she nor her family believe what they're hearing about Mt Pinatubo. Most days they can't even see it through the tropical haze.
The government was telling all of us to evacuate. We could not accept it because we had lived there for so long, and I was also 8 months pregnant.
Ordinary Filipinos are reluctant to leave their homes, and at Clark, the military is even more hardline against the idea of evacuating the base. Its commanders are not prepared to cut and run until the scientists can say for sure when the volcano is going to blow. Aircraft continue to take off and land on the remnants of Pinatubo's last eruption, as though it never happened. It's a standoff between the scientists and the soldiers. On the base's closed-circuit TV, Chris Newhall is pressed for a precise eruption date.
Time periods that right now we cannot see deep enough into our crystal ball to say for sure one way or the other.
Then in early June, Pinatubo is rocked by a cluster of mysterious earthquakes. If Ray and his team are reading it right, the quakes outline not a river, but a massive sea of magma. And on June 7, its immense pressure fuels Pinatubo's first battle cry. A 28,000-foot plume of steam erupts into the atmosphere. It is Pinatubo's declaration of war. The monster's attack has begun. The lowlands are slowly emptying, but high on the mountains, some plan to stay despite the danger. On Pinatubo's west face, just 6 miles from the summit, seismologist July Sabat and his team make camp. Since the first days of the ITA's warning, July has been Ray's eyes and ears, radioing vital seismic data to help him plot the monster's movements.
By now, our seismographs were continuously recording so many tremors that I knew it was going to erupt. We were at the front line, but I didn't even think about getting scared. What mattered to me was getting the information back to Ray Pununbayan so he could warn and evacuate those in danger.
In charge of this area, and
At the same mountain campsite is Jing Magsaysay, a reporter with the Philippines' main network.
We felt excitement, we felt fear, but we had to do it. We had to be where we were to get the story.
He's covered other volcanic eruptions and is confident he'll be able to pull out when the time comes. On and around Pinatubo, fateful choices have been made. And none are more fateful than by a group in a remote cave high on the mountain's southeast face. In all, there are 40 families, a whole Itas tribe, nearly 100 people, men, women, and children. Some are here to keep faith with their God, some because they do not want to leave their homes, and some because they believe that no matter what is coming, they will be safe in the cave. A tribesman named Sebio waits with his wife and young son for the judgment of Apo Malari, the god of Mt Pinatubo. 10 miles away, the military has finally issued its evacuation order. At Clark Air Base, they're recording a constant stream of earthquakes, sometimes at the rate of 1 a minute. The pride of the U.S. Air Force is being deserted. 15,000 military personnel and their families leave.
We were evacuating people who were on life support. We were evacuating infants who were in incubators and who had tubes attached to them.
Colonel Ron Rand is one of a core group of officers and men who will stay to guard the base. Now, only they and the scientists remain. The eruption of Mt Pinatubo is no longer a matter of if, but when. At 8:50 a.m. on Tuesday, June 12th, it launches an enormous column of ash, 12 miles straight up.
Now we knew what we were up against. Now we knew how huge this thing was.
Here's this plume, unlike anything I've ever seen. Giant, dark, gray, swirling, roiling, boiling, you know, just growing as you looked at it and going like a rocket. When I was a young guy in the Air Force, I got a ride in an F-4. And we climbed to 43,000 feet, and it took us 2 minutes and 40 seconds. This plume rose 60,000 feet in 1 minute. So you're standing there looking at it, and it was like this.
So powerful is the force of the eruption that even its sound waves shoot straight up. Those watching on the ground hear nothing. This awesome event takes place in absolute silence. The Philippine Army and Air Force are still evacuating people off the mountain. They're finding more and more Itas. Many Filipinos believe that this is the climactic eruption. This is the big one. Ray and the team at Clark know something worse. The magma beneath Pinatubo is boiling, gathering force, but it has not yet reached the surface. This is not Pinatubo's main eruption. This is just the beginning. For 48 hours, near constant earthquakes swarm ever closer to the surface. Dense clouds of ash blast from cracks opening in Pinatubo's summit. The volcano is priming itself for one of the greatest eruptions ever witnessed. On the mountain itself, the Philippines Air Force is still rescuing small groups of Itas. But those being found and flown to safety are telling their rescuers of others who have stayed, a tribe of Itas who won't come down. On the lowlands, tens of thousands of people are on the move. With ash billowing down from the mountain, village after village empties as their inhabitants flee. As night falls, the darkness around Pinatubo is broken by the constant cracks of earthquakes as the sea of magma builds up unimaginable pressure. There are only hours left before the hellfire reaches the surface and breaks free. Just beyond the foothills of Pinatubo, the scientists at Clark Air Base wait out the night. The seismographs are steadily warning of a cataclysm even greater than they have predicted. The tension is intense. Everyone is exhausted. Most are frightened, but none think of leaving. Seismologist PJ De Los Reyes is scared by what she's seeing in the seismic readings.
For me, as far as I'm concerned, it was something I had to do. There was no choice anymore. I mean, my kids needed me, but my country needed me more. So there wasn't any choice.
The minutes tick by. It is a countdown to catastrophe. Then at 5:55 a.m., the seismographs go off the chart. It has begun. What those left at Clark witness is almost beyond imagination. The western horizon is one giant boiling cloud of ash. Pinatubo's climactic eruption sequence has started. Watching in awe, geologist Leo Bautista understands the danger they now face. Those who have done so much to warn others are now directly in harm's way.
The first thing that came to my mind is I might not see my family again. I've been away for maybe 1.5 months already from my house and from my family, and I was wondering whether I'll have the chance to see them again. So.
For the next 6 hours, Pinatubo erupts 4 more times.
Day became night at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it seems that as if it's the end of the world.
It is noon, and it looks like midnight out here. You can hear the sound of the ash falling.
Each blast hurls millions of tons of ash into the sky. Massive clouds of poison gas billow into the atmosphere. Gales of volcanic rock rain down as far as 30 miles away. The monster's fury is terrifying. Then at 1:42 p.m. on June 15, 1991, comes one of the single most cataclysmic natural events of the 20th century. A release of energy 200,000 times greater than the Hiroshima atomic blast. A cubic mile, 5 cubic kilometers of magma detonates straight up, reaching the stratosphere in seconds. From space, it looks like a vast nuclear bomb has gone off, blacking out the Philippines and the South China Sea. Pyroclastic flows thunder for miles in all directions, expanding as they suck in cold air. Billowing killer clouds of superheated ash and rock.
I think you could light off every bomb and every rocket and every explosive man has stored all over the world, and I don't know that you would have registered to the Earth what Mother Nature did on the 15th of June. It was unbelievable.
High on Pinatubo, Sebio and his tribe wait for Apo Malare's judgment. The mountain is exploding around them. Hurtling toward their cave is a massive pyroclastic flow. 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, traveling at 100 miles an hour. In skin going dead.
That was the scariest part for me. You can't imagine how it felt like knowing that you can be overrun by a pyroclastic flows. And the only thing that we wanted to do was escape from Clark Air Base.
Blinded by ash and caught in a gale of mud, they drive west.
Inside the car, it's like you're trapped. You cannot go out.
In her car, Leo Bautista is trying not to panic as she peers into the impenetrable darkness.
Driving at 20 kilometers per hour, very slow. I realized that if the volcano decides to exert a bigger eruption, then we're really going to get fried. We're really going to die.
Ron Rand loses the rest of the convoy. He is left alone to wonder what's out there.
I mean, it was everything from the utter darkness to the roaring rocks and stuff flying all over the place, earth rumbling from continuous earthquakes. You would get pelted by the stuff coming through the sky. I was beginning to think, this is a fine mess I got myself into now, you know.
For a harrowing hour, he drives on, trying to find the convoy. Behind him, pyroclastic flows reach the very gates of the base. But by then, they've made it to safety.
Pinatubo made me realize, you know, there but for the grace of God go out. You know, I could have been swallowed up and gone, and nobody would have ever been the wiser.
But Pinatubo is not through with the Philippines. This once-in-a-century volcanic eruption is about to be joined by another elemental force of nature. The catastrophe is far from over. Of surviving. Of the 1 million people once threatened by Mt Pinatubo, only a few hundred remain in peril. Its slopes and lowlands are almost totally deserted. It seems man will escape the monster's wrath. And so he might, but for the volcano's murderous accomplice. A super typhoon named Yunya. It is an incredible and deadly coincidence of natural events. Racing across the South China Sea, Typhoon Yunya reaches Pinatubo just as the volcano enters its most cataclysmic phase. It is a 1-2 killer punch, the worst possible combination of calamities.
It's unbelievable. It's just simply unimaginable that these two things can happen at the same time. So you're in the middle of a battle between the forces of nature, and you're right in the middle of it.
Billions of tons of ash are caught by lashing winds and torrential rain, turning the sky above Pinatubo into a boiling mudstorm. To those caught in it, it's as if concrete is pouring from the sky. House after house, building after building, falls to the devastating mudstorm. It happens quickly and without warning, crushing those trapped inside.
It was too much for any town or any person to take. It was just unnatural.
The scene is being repeated in all the provinces around Pinatubo. Beng Mendoza fled with her family only days before. Her house lasts barely 15 minutes before collapsing under its immense load of volcanic mud. The mudstorm will be the catastrophe's most immediate killer, but it is not the only one. The torrents of water running off Pinatubo have collected massive quantities of hot volcanic debris. They are called lahars, dense mud flows, and they tumble over the lowlands like floods of liquid rock, crashing through towns, grinding everything in their path. For 15 hellish hours, the monster of Pinatubo hurls everything it can at the Philippines. And when the sun finally breaks through again 2 days later, it is shining on another planet. From horizon to horizon, it is a moonscape, a lifeless black and white world. largest volcanic cloud of the 20th century is circling the Earth. It will significantly alter global temperatures for the next 3 years. The biggest American military base on foreign soil is destroyed. Clark will be abandoned by the greatest military power on Earth, beaten by a force more destructive than any human enemy.
After the fact, we said it was the mother of all eruptions. It was the mother of all events any one of us had ever been through. It was huge, it was scary, it was powerful. I know it changed the way I thought about the world we live in.
Nature did its very worst, but its opponents, men like Ray Pununbayan and the men and women who worked with him, did better. Incredibly, in this awesome natural event, fewer than 300 people lost their lives, when it could have been hundreds of thousands. It is a victory for man. A human catastrophe was averted. Man had never faced an eruption on the scale of Pinatubo, armed with the high-tech weapons of the 20th century. But it was far more than just science that saved so many. It was an extraordinary human effort on every level.
I think that had any one of those elements been missing, we could have ended up with a major disaster on our hands.
More than any volcano that went before it, Pinatubo proved that man can not only accurately predict a volcanic eruption, but that he can also protect his fellow man from one of nature's most catastrophic events. But it also showed that however advanced our scientific ability may be, we ignored those who best know Mother Nature at our peril. In the aftermath of the eruption, Beng Mendoza gave birth to a healthy son named Rindy. July Sabat, Leo Bautista, and PJ De Los Reyes went back to work at the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, keeping watch on volcanoes throughout the country. Chris Newhall continued to work with the United States Geological Survey, but plans to retire in the Philippines. Jing Magsaysay, like all those who lived through the eruption, says it changed him forever.
Pinatubo, in the end, became one of my closest friends, I think. It taught me a lot of things. It showed me how meaningful and how meaningless, at the same time, a human being can be.
And Ray Pununbayan, the undisputed hero of what was one of the greatest eruptions in modern history, retired in 2002.
The Pinatubo experience is something that you recall with a smile. It's a classic example of how international cooperation should work when you're responding to disaster. It's a success story.
To this day, the Aitas who perished in the cave on the mountain have remained where they fell, their skeletons awaiting a reburial. But now, Sebio and his people gather their bones and carry them to their new village, where they are laid to rest in a tomb sealed with the ashes of the volcano. There is grief and bitter memories as the time of their deaths is remembered. But there is also hope. The Aitas people have returned to their sacred land. Their mountain may have changed, but their God is at peace again.